Welcome to Roll to Save, the RPG history podcast. Call of Cthulhu.
Hello and welcome to part 1 of our Call of Cthulhu Roundtable. I say part 1 because we originally recorded this in one hit. However, it turned out to be a bit of a lengthy episode, so we're splitting it into 2 parts. We get joined in this episode by a good friend of the podcast and also a good friend of Jackson Elias, Matt Sanderson, one of Call of Cthulhu's authors, and he gives his opinions on what he thinks about the game, the setting and the system, and we do our usual jibber-jabber where we go through our memories of the games too. So enjoy part 1, part 2 will be along shortly, and for those fans of her, I'm afraid Mrs. Roll to Save is on holiday at the moment, so you won't be getting her dulcet tones, you're stuck with me instead. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to a rather long-awaited Roll to Save Roundtable. I am joined as usual with my co-hosts, Steve and Jason. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Yeah, pretty good. Enjoying the bright summer sunshine in County Cork. Loving it.
Lovely.
I'm good. I'm enjoying a lovely Texas weather in spring, which usually means some rain, some sun, and a lot of allergies. So... fantastic.
Lucky you. Yeah, it's actually very sunny here in Utah, but I'm on guard because we're having what we always call fake spring, because you can guarantee it will snow shortly. I've had it before my birthday in May where it's been snowing.
I'm kind of thinking this is pretty much, we had good weather yesterday, good weather today. That's it. That's summer done. Okay? So it will start raining from tomorrow, and that'll be it in Ireland for 2024.
Yeah, I had someone ask me at work, they said they're thinking of going to Scotland on holiday, and she was like, well, when's the best time to go for weather? And I'm like, there's like about 2 weeks in July.
And even then it's not guaranteed, is it?
Yeah, even then. Yeah. So how much do you like rain? If you had rain in the summer, it's fun. Which you don't really get here because it's a desert. Anyway, we're also joined by a special guest, special musical guest. It's not Cher, it is, in fact, Mr. Matt Sanderson from the good friends of Jackson Elias podcast. How are you, Matt?
Hello. Yes, glad to be here. Doing good. And yeah, you don't want me singing, just saying. You're probably much better listening to Cher if you wanted something vaguely approximating singing.
I don't know, I think it could be a treat to have you sing. Today we are going to talk about Call of Cthulhu, because that was what our last history episode was all about. But before we start that, I'm going to ask you, what have you guys been playing recently?
So normally my answer to this is 5th Ed D&D, and that has continued, but not so much recently. Been playing a bit of Dark Heresy, so mutual friends of ours, Sandy's been running a Dark Heresy game for us, and that's been quite interesting, quite a nice little change of pace. And also another friend, Jason Shrimpton's been running some Shadowrun 2nd Edition for us as well.
Wow.
So it is quite old school. In fact, both of those are quite old school kind of games, which, but it's been quite fun. It's been quite a nice distraction from the 5th Ed, which is still ongoing in a lot of places, and Baldur's Gate 3, which is still obsessing about as well. So yeah, a little bit of a change, which is nice.
Bucket of dice for your Shadowrun game.
Trying to work out how many dice you've got in a dice pool, and I'll add all the dice from my hacking pool into this test, and luckily Roll20 makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
What about you, Steve? What have you been up to?
Surprisingly a good amount of different role-playing, as well as some games recently, given how busy I usually am with work. I started a game called Vishen. It didn't go past the first session because the game fell apart, but it seemed like a really interesting game that I highly recommend checking out. It's some Nordic horror stuff. It's interesting. Nice system and a nice backstory. I'd love to actually play a full game of that. Then I started getting back into some 5th edition, which I haven't played in a couple of years, and we're doing a Theros campaign, which is an ancient Greece Magic the Gathering setting that's actually quite interesting. And so I'm playing, actually playing on the next session tonight on the Sunday. So it's kind of fun. I'm playing an archer guy who is a failure at trying to win at competitions, but trying his best. And the game that I'm most excited about playing, which actually it keeps getting delayed, but we're working on getting our first session going, is Cyberpunk. I've never actually played Cyberpunk before, but I've always wanted to. So hopefully going to get some Cyberpunk rad going very, very soon. And I'm also totally hooked on Cyberpunk 2077 because of that. And that game has just consumed me over the last couple of weeks.
It's pretty awesome these days, I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad I waited till it got to the point with the game with the patches now because it's so good.
I didn't quite wait all that time, but it was still great. It was still fantastic. It's supposed to be even better now. Mr. Shrimpton's been trying to get me to restart and all that kind of stuff. But Baldur's Gate 3 is my first love at the moment, so I can't do it. I'm interested to hear how the Cyberpunk game works out, though, because I remember playing back in the early 2000s, the Cyberpunk original and even Cyberpunk 2020 version. Because the original one was set in 2007, by the way, for anybody who's counting. So I don't know where your cyberware is, but I was expecting some wide reflexes by now.
Yeah, it's a bit like during COVID when lots of people were getting freaked out and saying Bill Gates was putting nanobots in the vaccine. I was like, to be honest, I could do with that. Some nanobots helping rebuild this wreck of a body that I've got. That would do quite nicely.
I think we'd all take that. Thanks, Ian.
Oh, as per normal, I tend to run more than play. I'm mainly running some play tests for a Call of Cthulhu scenario I've got in the pipeline, and a second shout out for Vason, because I've been running a fair amount of that on the convention circuit recently. But actually, in the few times I get to play, I've mainly been playing the Masters of Dune campaign. We've just started that for Dune Adventures in the Imperium, which I'm thoroughly enjoying, with my inverted commas combat mentat that just so happened to clothesline a Harkonnen spy in the previous game, Agents of Dune, that we played, the starter set for the game, and got that moniker stuck with them ever since. And also, very much a left field game that you don't really hear anyone talk about these days, the Dylan Dog role-playing game that was originally Italian. Yeah, we've got an Italian ref in our group on a Wednesday. So every time between different sessions, between different things I'm running, or if we've got again a mutual friend that some of us will know here, Andrew Burbage running the Alien RPG. Between different scenarios, that we're kind of halfway through the Colonial Marines campaigns at the minute. We've got one of our group, Eleanor, running Dylan Dog, which is a very quirky little system, but great background to it. Got a very distinct feel to it, of investigative horror with a slightly comedic angle to it. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyable.
I've actually recently started running a small Wraith game. I've not touched Wraith in years.
Oh God, I pity your players.
Thanks.
Having been one.
Yeah, me too.
It's a fairly depressing game, but it's a lot of fun. They've put a ton of effort into their characters, and I'm really interested to see where that goes next. I've also been playing some Vampire 5th Ed, which I have to say I quite like. It's basically Vampire the Masquerade, but with a new skin on top, and it's actually quite nice how they've taken away some of the bookkeeping that you originally had in revised and 20th anniversary edition. So the blood mechanic is quite neatly handled.
Wow, Ian, I would say, can we record that? But we already are, because they've made a believer out of you for Vampire 5th Ed with how much you've been a skeptic of it for how many years now?
I'm just skeptical of anything new because I'm old. That's why.
He fears change.
Despite the fact I do a ton of change management at work, I'm like, yeah, but you need to bust down your detractors, and I'm like, I'm not playing a new version of that game.
Yeah,
but no, it's good. I'm not 100% sold on the rulebook. However, replacing a lot of the very evocative art from the original editions with these weird photographs of people posing as vampires. It's a bit like, it's not as bad as the old Mind's Eye Theatre books. They used to have randos posing being vampiric, and you're like, oh, no, this is kind of cringeworthy. This isn't so much cringeworthy, it's just a different artistic direction, but not something that I'm a massive fan of.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to hear how your Wraith game goes. Having played with you and also had an invite to that game and said, hey, I want to see how other players have fun with it. I don't want to pick one of the spots because that game deserves a small table. I'm curious to hear more about that because I'm kind of jealous, but also kind of like, nice to not get into that depressing game this time.
I won't talk too much about it because it is very depressing. The character concepts are brilliant, but you read them and you're like, wow, that's fairly grim reading.
Do you play anything fun, Ian? Do you play anything for a laugh? Any Dylan Dog or something?
No, I'm actually playing in a D&D 5th Ed campaign that's just lighthearted and fun and breezy, and I'm playing.
I'm sure you don't like it.
Playing a half-elf rogue who goes around trying to be charming and lying to people and doing stuff like that.
Oh, you're playing against Typlan, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I'm such a honest, upstanding citizen. I ran a game of Paranoia recently, actually, for some folks on another podcast, and that was fun. The best part about it was I always give a warning at the beginning of any Paranoia game that one of the rules that I adhere to is if anyone, because we all play it virtually, if anyone accidentally sends something publicly, they're considered to have done it and everyone's seen it. And everyone's like, no, I never do that. And true to form in this game, there's one moment where some guy's like scheming to do all this stuff and he types all blatantly in open chat. Like, well, I guess everyone sees that then. He's like, oh my God, we almost get to the end of the game and nobody had done it. It was me. I'm like, yep, you chose to publicise your treason. Anyway, we're not here to talk about all of that nonsense. We are here to talk about good old Call of Cthulhu, the granddaddy of all the horror games, still going strong after 40 plus years, which, as I said in the other podcast, is not something you can normally say after 40 plus years about going strong. So I'll ask you all the same thing. What was your first experience with Call of Cthulhu? When did you find it and what did you play?
Call of Cthulhu was a bit of a kind of step change for everything else I'd played before. It was and I did this in sort of probably the late 80s, so it was pretty early on in Cthulhu's existence. I had a couple of friends at school that were quite into it and into the books and the H.P. Lovecraft kind of the fiction, and they wanted to play, and I had a couple of guys who were pretty keen to ref it. A guy called Patrick, a guy called Craig. Both of them ran different campaigns for us and had uniquely different styles as well. But it was the first game I ever played where it didn't really pay to be the jock. It actually paid to be the nerd, right? Being a nerd, that of course is empowering, and that's what you want to do, isn't it? So, you could put down all your I am Conan, the Cimmerian king vibe, and you can go, actually, I'm a librarian from Boston, and what I want to do is, oh my God, and it was great. And I had these two games. One, Craig was a bit more of the kind of, he really got into Dreamlands, and at every opportunity there's some magical concoction beer or something you've got to drink, and then you end up in the Dreamlands, and he was big into that. So that was a bit more psychedelic, I guess, than the other one. I think the one Patrick ran was a lot more, probably more like a game you would run, Ian. It's a lot more visceral and a lot more fatal and probably a bit more depressing. And I don't mean anything bad by that. There are games I enjoy like that, but you know what I mean. Like I said about, do you play anything for fun? That kind of thing. So I think the first character I had, I was in my late teens, so of course it was somebody who's Indiana Jones was keen on my mind, and you want to be a professor, but you want to have a gun and you want to at least be able to fight. And I think my first memory is kind of reconnaissancing. Is that a word? Reconnoitering? That's a better word.
Reconnoitering, yeah.
The place where these cultists were supposed to be doing a summoning ritual, and I looked over the top of the hill, got my binoculars out, and I'm watching them, and they summoned what they were going to summon, and I went insane, and that was pretty much the end of my game. And that taught me a few lessons, which is just sometimes it's better not to look. And I've been playing Cthulhu ever since, for on and off. Probably got more back into it again with Matt when I was back in the UK. And we did, again, everything from... It started out very serious, then got completely unserious, ended up at Pulp Cthulhu at one point. But that Poison Tree adventure that you ran for us, Matt, I really enjoyed that. Yes. I thought that was excellent. That was a really good, interesting kind of lineage-based horror, which was quite good. Some great games. I've enjoyed them all. It's been fantastic. And I tend to try, it's like everything, I prefer to play wizards, so I tend to play the guy who reads the book, loses the sand, gains the spells. That's my happy place. So try and start off with as much power as possible to get as much sanity as possible to then lose it. But hopefully not by facing monsters, but by learning stuff.
I saw a cartoon that someone drew once about Call of Cthulhu versus other role-playing games, and you've got a guy coming to play Call of Cthulhu who's a big D&D player, and he's like, right, where are the magic items? He's like, you don't want the magic items. He's like, what's the magic item? He's like, that book over there. Why have none of you picked it up? Don't pick it up. And that's one of the things I always loved about it, was there's that risk-reward
forbidden knowledge kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah, exactly. To save the human race, you have to turn your brain to cheese.
You have to damn yourself effectively if you want to stand any chance. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter that some guy's got a Thompson 45 and he's belting out magazine after magazine into the eldritch horror. It don't care,
Yeah, most of them was just like, this being cannot be impaled by firearm.
Exactly.
Like,
I very much enjoyed the fact that you couldn't just take that standard fight or flight response. You had to do a bit more thinking. It paid you to do investigation. If you knew you were coming up against, they never made it easy. It was always hard. Chances are you didn't make it out. I don't think I played many long-term campaigns of Cthulhu, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it's one of the things we'll talk about in a minute, about the scenarios, the published scenarios, but one of the things I always found really interesting, usually in the anthologies where you had multiple scenarios, if you actually look at them, compare them to like a D&D scenario or something from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and you usually have like a single antagonist. There'll be like a creature, or you'll have human minions doing minion-y stuff. But it's not like, D&D, where it's like, right, populate your dungeon with this menagerie of bad guys to thresh your way through. It's like, there's one thing in the basement, and you guys need to know how to get rid of it. And that's, as you say, it's a change of pace. It's completely different from...
Or don't go in the basement in the first place.
Or don't go in the basement in the first place, yeah. Do your summoning ritual from the kitchen.
Or throw one of your other investigators down the stairs into the basement. Either way, not saying I've done any of those things. I most definitely have.
She'll probably kill me for this, but the one role-playing game that Mrs. Roll to Save likes is Call of Cthulhu, and we played a game once which really set the tone for any character she played, whether three of them are investigating this sort of spooky house and there's weird goings on, and she's a bit like you, Jason, she's playing the academic type who's like holding the knowledge, and they're upstairs and there's a blood-curdling kind of screech from the basement, and two of the other players are like, right, we're going to investigate it. And I'm like, Tara, what are you doing? She's like, putting the car and driving off. Like, but you're leaving them behind? She's like, they're not coming back. I'm going to go and find out what this is. And that, I was like, oh my god, that's a whole discretion is the better part of valor thing.
Pragmatism, that's what that is.
Pragmatism, indeed, yeah.
I'll be very brief, honestly, because I never really touched it that much when I was in my glory days of playing role-playing games and card games back in the day in college and such. It was one of those ones that was sort of tangential to like everything else. I was intrigued by it. I played a little bit of Mythos, probably with you and with other people, the card game.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I ran through a full scenario of it in college. It was one of those things that was just kind of like a side game, but I was always intrigued by Chaos M and everything they were publishing. That and Pendragon and RuneQuest. And it was always one of those, I'll get to it later. And later is 20 years later, when the last time I actually played it was with you. And playing all the board games, which we'll talk later, is kind of even my resurgence and interest in Cthulhu and Arkham and all those kind of good things. So I'm looking forward to talking about all that stuff. But yeah, I was very, very light touch back in the day. Unlike some other people on this call.
Well, it's something that I actually started back with the time when we first met, back with MK by Night game. It was one of the other players there saw the kind of play style that I had when I played my original Tremere in the game and said, hey, if that's the kind of thing that you want to do in a role-playing game, this is a game that would quite well suit you. And so got hold of the what was at the time the 5.6 edition rulebook. I had to read through that, and that then got me looking into Lovecraft and reading up on the original source material. But it wasn't until a good few years later that I finally got to, when I joined the MKRPG group, that I finally got to play the game. I remember it was the scenario Camp Sunny, which is now, I believe, released on the Cult of Chaos group that Chaosium run for doing promotion for convention scenarios. It's one of their trial scenarios that they have up there that people can run. And remember, my poor character, I was playing a female investigator. The last thing that had before the curtains faded to black was her being led, pretty much mind being broken, off into the lake by a deep one to become breeding stock. And yeah, that set the tone for set the tone for my future love affair.
Can I just say, I find it actually hard to believe that anybody introduced Matt to Call of Cthulhu. I thought he was born loving Call of Cthulhu and Lovecraft. I can't believe somebody actually introduced him. This is news to me, and it's broken.
He's actually got a large, cuddly Cthulhu sitting behind him.
He has, yeah.
Yeah, it's as big as me.
Yeah, but that was one of the interesting things I found when doing the research for the history episode was, like, nowadays it's so mainstream. Like, you can buy a cuddly Cthulhu in Target if you want, and people who don't necessarily know Lovecraft, who know who Cthulhu is, it's become part of pop culture. But when they actually first made the game, Lovecraft was so niche. Literally this obscure pulp hack from the 20s that had a very small following around the world, and there was actually debate as, do we actually call this game Call of Cthulhu? Because they were originally called it Dark Worlds, which is a terrible name, and someone's like, why would we name it after some forgotten story that nobody knows? And now we're sitting here in 2024 and
It
Matt's got
works.
a large Cthulhu behind him. Yeah, it works.
I mean, Dark Worlds, really? I mean, that would have been rubbish. I wouldn't have played that. Well,
exactly.
I don't know. In my angsty period, maybe I would have looked at it, but Call of Cthulhu is much more evocative.
Can I be dark in a world?
Yeah,
I can kind of see where that title. I can kind of see where the title comes from, because Chaosium have produced a lot of, insert name here, world games like Thieves World, Ring World, etc. A whole load of those ones.
Yeah, that is probably actually where it came from. But I'm glad he didn't choose it.
me too.
I mean, when I first found the game, it is, isn't it? It's like it's a horror game in a dark world, like the world of darkness. No, I remember when I first discovered it, it was bizarrely in a White Dwarf article, and I had no idea how to pronounce the name. But the name actually made it more intriguing. Rather than, if it was just called Dark World, you'd be like, all right, it's a horror game. But you're like, what's this? Who's this Cthulhu guy?
How do you pronounce it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you always get that in every edition. There's always the little Chaosium's guide to how to pronounce Cthulhuid names, which is very handy because a lot of them it's just consonants with the odd vowel chucked in.
I remember always wanting to and never getting the chance to, and everybody always promising me they were going to run the massive Nyarlathotep game, and I'm probably not even pronouncing that right now after 40 years. So
Close enough.
Close enough. Oh, there you go. I didn't summon it, so that's pretty good. That's always the risk, you know. You might say these words and the things appear. But nobody ever did run it for me, and I'm gutted. So if anybody ever fancies it, I'm more than willing to step up on this thing.
Yeah. I've got the 7th ed sitting on my shelf, and we'll come to that shortly in terms of the scenarios, but it's such a well put together product. It's just absolutely gorgeous. The handouts are amazing. There's a group that make a pack of handouts that are professionally produced for it. It's a massive box of like news clippings and audio recordings and stuff, and it just looks absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, the HP Lovecraft Historical Society, their box set for that is phenomenal.
We've talked about scenarios, and they published a ton of them, all the way from huge globe-trotting campaigns like Master Nyarlathotep to books where you've got one-shots in there. Do any of you have any particular scenarios that you're fond of, or you've got fond memories of? Or did you largely play homebrew games? Because again, that was one of the charms, I think, of Call of Cthulhu. Compared to a lot of other games where you have quote-unquote canon sitting in the background the whole time, Call of Cthulhu is very, very easy to write a game for because it's so vast and flexible in terms of the setting and what's. In fact, the whole theme is humanity is small and insignificant, so you can do whatever you want.
So there's definitely scenarios I was fond of. So a lot of it was homebrew. A lot of it was, somebody decided, wouldn't it be great to, have a evil cultist and don't want to raise this figure or whatever. That's fine. But there was a few that were the pre-written ones. As I said earlier, the Poison Tree one that Matt ran for us, I thought that was really clever, very enjoyable. The one that stands out to me, kind of, it's weird. It's probably got more of a. It's got a position in my memory that's probably greater than it really was. It's fond reminiscing, okay, and it wasn't even a Call of Cthulhu scenario. Really, it was. I think it was Delta Green, which is the modern version, right? And it was something I think it was called Grace Under Pressure, which was one that was set in an underground scientific laboratory. Think Abyss, all right, or more accurately, think is it Underwater. There's a film called Underwater that's got similar concepts, and I played it with a bunch of guys I've been playing with for years, and we all had these pre-generated characters, which is generally a bad sign. Generally means you're going to die a horrible death. We played in this claustrophobic, submersible environment for ages, and it went on for ages with nothing really significant happening, just little freaky things going on and things that ramped up the tension. In my head, I really, really enjoyed that. I'd do that again in a heartbeat. Again, I think I survived, but completely insane.
That's actually a win in Call of Cthulhu, to be honest.
I think I got into I think there was some like bathysphere escape pods, and I ended up getting into one of those. And as I breached the surface, so did something else rather larger than I, and that was the end of my sanity.
Yeah, at least you didn't end up with some Deep One side piece like Matt did.
I didn't end up as a Deep One side piece yet. I just literally went loco in a bathysphere, which is
As you do.
As you do, yeah. I mean, but the ref, he was a guy called Andy. He built up the tension. He had there was a real claustrophobic atmosphere about it, which it was weird. We're just playing in a school hall, 10 guys, 8 guys playing this game, but the way he did it was really good, and I have fond memories of that. And as I say, it was a modern Cthulhu game.
Mm-hmm. There's one campaign that was published in the 90s by Pagan Publishing, a third party, called Walker in the Wastes, and its introduction scenario is one of the best ones I've ever played, because imagine the thing. It's like that. If you talk about claustrophobia, they're in an Arctic research station, and it sets the tone really nicely, because the very first thing that happens is there's a crash of an airship, and they help with the effort, but they realise it takes ages for anyone else to come to provide assistance, and then that finishes, and then you start the scenario proper, and they're busy in their research station doing researchy stuff, and then one of the guides and one of the scientists turns up with a couple of bodies on a sledge, and they're like, hey, look what we found out there, and the doctor's like, oh, these bites don't come from anything known to man, and then the snowstorm starts, and the transmitter's down, and they've got to figure out what to do. And it's brilliantly done. It's very, very atmospheric.
And it's set in the 20s, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to be getting into the helicopter.
I thought it was the 30s.
It might be the 30s, yeah.
Either way, you're not running to the helicopter. Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah, yes, there's no get to the chopper. You're basically, guess we have to figure this out. But every time I've run that, people have commented on how atmospheric it is, because you feel that panic of, we're here on our own, there's nothing we can do. The people around us, if the poor guide you've got dies, it's like, well, we don't speak the language. And there's all sorts of nice little touches, like there's a feud between 2 of the local tribes, and the good guy tribe gets wiped out by the bad guys who are summoning things, and it's just really, really well put together. And I'm really surprised it's never seen a reprint, because it's such a good scenario. The whole campaign's pretty decent as well. It takes the usual Cthulhu trope for campaigns of globe-trotting. You go around the world, find things, stop things, and pull all the evidence together for the final showdown. But it's very decent.
I was going to say, the only reason why that doesn't top my list of all-time favourite campaigns is that after the second chapter, it has such a massive tonal shift that requires your scientist characters to all of a sudden become commandos, and that's the only thing that is such a jarring thing that kind of tips it over for me. I mean, I played it and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but from what I understand from our GM, we ended up skipping a large chunk of just go to another place and do something, go to another place and do something, and skip to the end game a lot earlier than what is intended.
Yeah, there's a couple of the scenarios that are a bit samey in that respect. Like you say, I think Commandos is a good way to put it. Without giving away too many spoilers, there's a cult going to do cult things, and they're assembling airships to meet in one part of the world. And the players have the opportunity to sabotage these efforts. And there's ways of doing it that obviously doesn't involve blowing things up, but some of them, that's kind of the solution that's offered. But again, like any good scenario, it's what I like about the way KSCM structured the scenarios. If you make good decisions early on, it makes your final confrontation easier. Like, what you do matters. I hate campaigns where you'll have 5 parts to it, you get to the 5th part, and everything that went before doesn't really matter. And I'm looking at you, Enemy Within, which always saddens me. I've got the remixed director's cut edition, and I was so saddened when I get the final copy. I'm like, okay, so it's like the original, nothing matters. You can play the 5th installment on its own because nothing else is worth a damn. But Call of Cthulhu always seems to get that right in terms of what they do. The other great thing about Walker on the Wastes, and I promise I'll move on from that once I finish, but the NPCs are superbly detailed in it. It's not just raving cultist number 1, raving cultist number 2. They give these people motivations and human personalities and jobs. There's one main baddie who is your archetypal drooling cultist who leaves bodies everywhere, but the majority of the cultists have fleshed out personalities, and they are just normal people who happen to be in with the bad guys.
I thoroughly enjoyed that. And you could say the same for what my top pick would be, that it has that aspect, but also a pagan publishing campaign, unsurprisingly, for having the same approach where it really gives the NPCs and the bad guys character. My top one, the pick is Realm of Shadows. I adore that campaign, which starts off very low key in terms of it's a single town where there is a very small scale problem, and it slowly unfurls not so much to a world spanning campaign, and it's also the time period in which it's set kind of negates the ability to do that, because this is set in the early 1940s during the kind of the opening shots of the Second World War, but still on the American front. So before Pearl Harbor happens, and they're still outside of the war, they're still neutral in that sense. But you start off in small town New England, and eventually you end up in South America and beyond in a metaphysical sense. That it ties into a few of the non-Lovecraft stories. It actually ties into more of the Clark Ashton Smith mythology that he built up. With, in particular, you can almost play through the events of one of my favourite all-time mythos stories, the Charnel God. So it has a lovely weave between original source material, a lovely low-key beginning that really sets what you think are quite low-key stakes, but gradually peels back layers of that onion to reveal it's something bigger going on. And yeah, I thoroughly recommend it. If anyone gets a chance to play that, take them up on it, because it's such a wonderful campaign.
I like what you say about being low-key, because it's not so much an issue, but one of the things I always had with the big campaigns that KSC made is a lot of them start with a bang. It's one thing I liked about the new edition of Master and the Architect. They put that other adventure in at the beginning to actually give you a reason for knowing the main character and being involved in it in the first place, rather than just turning up and some dude's dead and you decide to go out and investigate the murder. But things like Horror on the Orient Express, I love that campaign, but it's literally a bunch of entitled rich people who speed off around Europe on the Orient Express. And it's very bang, 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 bang. There's no low-key beginning. It starts with one of your friends trying to be murdered. I won't spoil it because it's an amazing campaign, but it's not low-key in the slightest. It just it hits you at 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds, and you're off and running, or whatever the train equivalent is.
Yeah, but thinking of the individual scenarios, though, the other one I'd really have to recommend if you don't want to invest the years in playing one of these long-term campaigns. If anyone's got hold of a copy of Terrors from Beyond, the last scenario in that, The Burning Stars, is my all-time favourite single scenario. That is, again, just phenomenal. I love games where there's that literal what the fuck moment when the GM pulls the rug out from under you and suddenly everything that you know and experience in the game is cast into a question or in a different light. And that scenario has the greatest what the hell moment that I've come across in any game. And no massive spoilers for it, but it starts with the PCs not really knowing where they are. It's that typical amnesia. You don't know who, you can know who you are, but you don't know where you are. You don't know what's brought you to this place. And it's just all of a sudden, bang, you're in this scenario. And it's a bit of a tightrope for the keeper. They have to use language in a particularly clever way, and have to remember consistently to do it in a particular fashion. But the payoff when the players suddenly realise or ask certain questions and you see that penny drop, it's beautiful. It really is so good.
Honestly, that kind of segues into, for me, more recently is when I've been playing the games, and honestly, like the large globe-trotting campaigns for me as a GM or keeper super daunting and intimidating. And, given that I don't have a lot of time to run games, I prefer one-shots. So the series of one-shots that they've done recently over the last 5-10 years with the books of anthologies have been just amazing to read through. And the one in particular that I ran a couple of years back for Ian and the crew, which was one of the ones in Doors to Darkness, it was Servants of the Lake. It was really easy to run, really atmospheric, not too intimidating. The players had a lot of fun, and it helped me get into the mode of being a keeper, and really just helped introduce certain elements of the lore and running the games. And that's another element that I find they do really well with Chaos Sim, is really helping, because it's not like a D&D sort of, dungeon mastering. You're just, like I said, running through a dungeon and killing all the monsters. There are certain elements of that a rookie keeper is not necessarily going to get immediately, of like the tone and the pace of running these games. And I really liked what they've done with these books of trying to just help introduce some of those ways to do things. And that really helped me, and I highly enjoyed running it, and I'd love to run another one of those types of one-shots for the group in the future, just because I don't get to run enough, and it was great.
Yeah, you did a really good job of running that, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said about the atmosphere, because you absolutely got that spot on. It was very atmospheric. It felt like you were in this investigative horror story. And to your point about how you run it, it's actually one thing that KSM has been consistently good at, I think, in the main rule books, really since I started looking at them. I started with 3rd edition, but I've got a copy of 2nd edition lurking there as well, is advice for keepers on how to run a Call of Cthulhu game. And Matt, you used the term onion skin earlier, but that was one that they always use that as an example for making your plot. Think of it like peeling an onion, that what starts as the top layer of fairly innocuous events leads to the next one, then the next one, all the way down to the bottom, and there's some sort of hideous secret you're not meant to know, and maybe you were better off not knowing in the first place. But they give... prior to this podcast, I would look through my copy of 3rd Ed, and there's some very good information in there of how to run a game. And that's like way back in the 80s that was written, back when a lot of GMing advice was, well, here's how you position your miniatures on the table, make sure that they can see line of sight when casting fireball. And it basically told you how to write a horror story, which is some great advice.
But I think that's true. I've never run Call of Cthulhu. I've always just been a player. I think I'd be quite intimidated running it. I think it's one of those games where the atmosphere is absolutely, you have to get it right. And it's like why I took a long time before I ever played a Malkavian in Vampire, because I didn't want to do it wrong. Okay, I don't want to do it in a way. So yeah, and the refs that I've played with have all done a fantastic job. Some of them better than others. Some of them, as I said, some of them really psychedelic and way out there. But other than, that was still a vibe that they nailed. So it was pretty good. And I think you're right. It does. The way the books are written and the hints definitely seem to help refs and keepers, whatever they're called, put together a decent system. And I think it might also have partially been responsible for a shift in how games are designed these days. There's a lot more storytelling involved than there used to be, right? You look at an old school role-playing D&D adventure, and exactly where do you place your miniatures and how do you fire fireball and all that kind of stuff. And, investigation was one of the first games I played that had decent investigations. Kind of, you'd go off to the library, you'd do some research, you'd put this research together, you'd come up with a plan. And I think it's got a lot to answer for in a good way.
I think the most atmospheric game I ever ran was completely accidental. We're playing at a friend's house, and we did the whole, okay, we'll just light it by candles and have the room all dark. And they're doing this investigation. I'm describing they're picking their way through the graveyard at midnight, and the clouds are obscuring the moon, and the torch is flickering as they pick their way through, looking for the gravestone of the cult leader who they think has been resurrected. And in that moment, the clouds part, and then the moon's there, and it shines down on this figure crouched on top of the tombstone. And at that moment, my friend's cat jumped up onto the table, and everyone lost their minds. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't plan that, but that worked perfectly. We'll just take a little time out here where people's hearts recompose themselves.
But of course, if Mrs. Roll Save had been involved, she would have gone at midday, not at midnight.
She always says her number one rule playing Call of Cthulhu is never trust the sheriff. It's always a never trust the sheriff. He's in league with the cultists. I don't even know if this was some tired trope that I must have rolled out several times, but she's like, no, don't trust him. He's a bad guy.
The equivalent of the butler did it, right?
Yeah, exactly. The sheriff did it. He's the one that's covering up all these murders, sacrificing folk to shove niggers in the woods. Nope, it's the sheriff. So I might have to write a game where the sheriff's actually the white knight that you have to come and get
it so that eventually that they kill the sheriff, thinking he's the bad guy, but actually he's the only thing holding back the darkness.
That's suitably bleak and nihilistic.
That'll teach him.
I think one of my scenarios is in the Pulp Cthulhu core book, Waiting for the Hurricane. I deliberately had all of the police in Key West killed off in one of the opening scenes so that there was no ambiguity. There was no one coming to save you. You had to take action into your own hands. You can't just do we got the police and hopefully they deal with it, or have that worry of, it's actually the authorities that are behind all this. No, they're all dead. Go and find someone else to pin this on or solve this problem for you.
I see Steve's face because that's exactly what we did in his game. So I'm looking in there, we're going to get the cops. One of the things I found interesting recently was, and you mentioned, Steve, with the newer books that are out, is 7th Ed is the first radical change to Call of Cthulhu in basically 40-odd years. If you look at previous editions, the new editions they released, the system stayed basically the same. They tweaked a few things here and there, maybe changed how languages worked or changed different skills, but it stayed essentially the same. They just packed in more stuff from old supplements. I mean, 3rd Ed is literally a packaging up of 2nd Ed and a couple of source books bound together and say, yeah, this is 3rd edition. But 7th Ed was the first radical change. And I'm interested to know what your guys' thoughts are on how 7th Ed compares to previous editions.
I can't answer that. I've never played 7th Ed. I don't think I've played. Have I played 7th Ed, Matt? Did we play 7th Ed?
It's the only one I've run.
In that case, I have played 7th Ed. Honestly, I'm interested to know how radically different it was because, as you rightly say, every system I've played of Cthulhu, I've picked it up and gone, this is the same character sheet I used in the 80s, pretty much. Right? You've got strength, con, dex, intelligence, power, charisma, or appearance, I think it was. And then you've got, luck and power and sanity points. It's all 5 times the stat, and it seemed to be exactly the same. So I'm really keen to know how radically different 7th Ed was.
Well, they've overhauled a lot of things like combat. Combat's very different from how the old way it was. Basically, you're playing RuneQuest. You go, you hit the guy, the guy hits you. Doesn't work that way.
And you can parry and you can dodge, and that's about your lot.
Yeah. It's changed that in 7th Ed. It's much more about almost like describing what you're doing, and you kind of roll at the same time, and it flows a lot more elegantly than the old way of doing it. I think they've removed, which I'm very glad, the resistance table, which was an absolute hangover from RuneQuest of, I want to oppose this guy in an arm wrestling competition. You can pay your strengths, and it gives you a percentage number, and it was just unwieldy and not really.
It wasn't if you understood basic maths. Basically, every point of advantage you had 5% better, and he had 5% less. It's a pretty simple table, Ian.
I mean, it's ungainly in terms of what it tries to do. Like, I'm arm wrestling the guy, so who rolls? Does the guy roll? Do I roll?
I mean, the only thing I would say is, in general, combat was short, brief, and fatal for an investigator. So, quite frankly, I didn't really pay a huge amount of attention to the combat rule. Pulp Cthulhu completely different. A lot more combat in Pulp Cthulhu. So interesting. I don't know. I guess I never noticed. So I'm kind of.
They've also changed the stats. So like in the old edition, your stats were like 1 to 18,
3 to 18, which 3d6.
Yeah, 3 to 18, and it was a weird kind of jarring. Well, how come everything else is a percentage and these are like D&D numbers
times by 5?
So now
D20.
They multiplied by 5, but they've made it easier to work out like when you get critical and when you get an extreme critical and all that stuff, whereas before it
because that's RuneQuest as well, because I remember when you rolled 1/20th of your chance to hit, that was a critical. If you rolled 1/5 of your chance to hit, that was called an impale, even if you were using a mace, which was an interesting concept to try and explain to people. And all that kind of. So that was kind of a hangover from RuneQuest. It's not a terrible system, I'm not going to lie. I think the reason it hasn't changed so much is because actually it's pretty good. I enjoyed RuneQuest back in the day as well. So.
It's really easy to understand because when you've got a bunch of percentage numbers, it's like if you want to do the thing, roll against your percentage. There's not some archaic trying to work out what bonus you get and what number you have to roll. It's like, okay, I've got a 50% chance of doing this.
I think the biggest problem with the percentage systems is when you've got stuff that you would expect to succeed upon, like driving or riding a horse, and your character's got 30%. And it's like, if
there's usually a rule though in a lot of games where if you've got over a certain level of, say, drive, you can do it when you're not under duress, and you only roll only roll the skill when like you're chasing after someone or
when you're not trying to drive a
avoid a
pickup
monster
truck full of dynamite into the mouth of a great old one.
Correct. That sort of well-paced nonsense that you get up to.
I remember that scenario.
I was going to say, it was mentioned for a reason. It happened.
It seems to flow a lot better, 7th Ed. I mean, again, there was nothing hugely wrong with the old one. It was just a little bit creaky at times. They've also made investigators a bit more capable in 7th Ed in terms of how many points they get to build. And the one thing I really love is they've made it so that your points allocation is not necessarily just based on your education. In the older editions, it was like, the better your education, the better a character you are, which felt very 80s, and your parents telling you to study hard, and if you do, you'll get a good job. And like, I'm playing a hobo. Why should my education dictate how good I am at scrounging out of bins? Whereas with this edition, there's a whole list of careers where the stuff that's more appropriate, like if you're an actress, your appearance is more important than your education, and that determines what skill points you get, stuff like that. And that's a nice way of balancing things out. So it's not always like the antiquarian who's the legend in the group because he's got the highest education score.
Yeah, because theoretically he could have the highest education score, and that means he's got more points to put into rifle.
Right, exactly.
The thing particularly I liked about changes between previous to 7th and going into 7th Ed is that 6th Ed backwards was very much a black or white, you succeed or you fail. And with my notoriously bad rolls, it would more often than not be fail, regardless. Even if I had 70 or 80% in a skill, it would be just fail, 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 which can be very kind of discouraging, very disheartening with a system that just seems to punish you in response to a failed roll. One of the things that 7th Ed introduces is the ability to push a roll. So where you have that ability to go, well, do I want to gamble because my skill is actually pretty good at potentially having a more negative consequence if I have a second chance at rolling the dice? And the optional rule in the book, and I stress optional because, boy, this caused a lot of problems during certain vocal advocates of, this is too pulp, when the game was first released, of spending your luck to modify rolls, which, but again, gave you another ability to try and succeed, but at cost. So, yeah, this is why I vastly prefer 7th Ed over the previous editions, just because it gives you that ability to be able to be better at succeeding, rather than just having that constant fail that I'd experienced far too many times.
Given yours and Ian's luck with dice, I mean, that just guarantees you're going to get even worse response. But I like the luck mechanic. I thought that was exceptionally good.
Yeah.
It was a resource you could spend that if you needed to really make a roll, you could take it, and I quite liked it. I quite like the luck roll.
I think the luck mechanic's beautiful because it actually functions better as luck than just a percentage number you roll.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I need to be really... The plane's plummeting to the ground. I only need 2 more percentage points to pull it out of a nosedive. Am I going to be lucky enough to do this? Well, don't roll a number. Spend your luck.
Absolutely. And it runs out.
It means it runs out, yeah.
It's suspenseful in itself. As it gets lower, you start like, I can't, affect this as much.
Exactly. The other great thing about the pushing mechanic is, especially as a keeper, it gives you that more narrative element of making changes to what's happening based on player actions. And that's always a brilliant thing, rather than proceeding down the preordained path. When someone decides, I really want to push, I really need to get these papers out of that office, I'm going to push my, locksmithing roll, and then they fail. And like, okay, here's the consequence. The cops turn up. They see you breaking into the building. What do you do? And suddenly you've got a whole new element to your game going on. Whereas beforehand it'd be like, you fail, your tools break. All right, okay, well, I guess we're not getting in there. And it reduces that yes or no consequence to actions failing. They have something similar as well with the new sanity rules that makes it a bit more narrative in terms of. In the old one, it was like you lose a certain amount of sanity, and the ref picks one of these things, and you're affected by it until you're cured. Well, with the new one, there's a mechanic of you kind of start seeing things.
Oh, delusions or hallucinations, which you can break through with a reality check. Probably the least used rule that I've ever seen at the table. Hardly anyone apart from me ever calls for it.
I love that mainly because, again, as a keeper, I like messing with my players' heads, and when they're actually questioning the reality, when they're questioning the reality of what they're seeing. And as you say, Matt, with the reality check rolls, when they're making reality checks for things that are actually just real, and then the whole game becomes this mind game of like, what's real, what's not, can I trust someone, can I trust my own mind? And that's very in keeping with the source material. And I think it's one of the genius things about when they came up with sanity in the first place, because it actually predetermines how people are going to play the game. It's not like a mechanic of, it's my mental hit points and I keep going till I run out of it. It's, I know that if I look at that thing, bad stuff's going to happen. Therefore, I want to go for it as long as possible without looking at the thing. So I'm going to go and be studious and prepare for it and get the charms and the rituals and all this stuff that I need before I have the confrontation, rather than I boot the door down and let rip my Thompson and see what happens.
And it's exactly right in the fact that, if you hear something moving around inside a room, do you want to look?
Yeah.
Or do you want to hide behind hide in the wardrobe and wait till it goes away? Right? It's a bit more human. It's not.
Yeah.
You're not just charging in heedless of your own existence. It enforces it. You're still welcome to do it. Of course you are. But there's a element that says I'll leave it for now until I know what I'm dealing with, and then I can come back. And when I do see it, I'll be fully prepared. Rather than I'll take a look now. What is it? Because if you think about it in D&D, right? You ask everybody to make a perception roll. Right? They all want to do it. They're all desperately to succeed. You ask somebody to make a perception roll or equivalent in Call of Cthulhu. See how many people are that keen. Not so many.
Yeah, exactly. One of the complaints I had back when I was running 5th Ed from one of my players who was a big fantasy RPG fan, liked the whole being heroic paladin and taking on the hordes of evil. What he really didn't like, and it's probably why Call of Cthulhu was not for him, was that sanity rule that if you lose 5 or more in a single shot,
temporary insanity.
You get temporary insanity. And it's like, it might just be you faint or you scream and run away, but it basically takes agency away from your character because you have a momentarily
Lots of people don't like that. Lots of
people don't like it. However, it's very in keeping with the type of game you're running. You're running a horror game, and it should be, you have this huge shock to your psyche, and you're suddenly like, cool, I pull my gun out and blast it. It should be, no, I shriek and I run away, or I drop my gun, or some other consequence. It's a bit like in the Alien RPG. I think it handles the stress mechanic really well. And I know when we were running Destroyer of Worlds, there was a moment where, I think, Steve, it was Josh's character, and he freaked out and almost totaled you a flamethrower.
Yeah.
Because
which is also true to the source material.
It's true to the source material, yeah, exactly. You don't get a choice to do it. You just blast away because you're panicking. And I think the sanity mechanic was the precursor to that sort of stuff, because it enforces a certain playstyle on players, which is genius. It's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, and definitely with Jason on there, that I know a lot of people do not like having that agency taken away from them. So one of the home rules that I've always introduced at the table when I've run it is, if someone does reach that glorious moment when they have 5 or more points that they lose, I very much turn it over to them and say, okay, how do you freak out? And don't roll for a random table. Give them the agency to turn around and say, you've got to do a particular freak out action, but how do you want to style that, and leave it very much in their hands as to how they react.
And I think that's actually a component that you see a lot of in 7th Ed, going back to things like pushing, is giving some narrative control to players. I always like doing that. I'll say things like, okay, you journey to the place, tell me what happens en route, and let the players get involved in it. Doing that with the temporary insanity is good, because it means they will play in character, but they don't necessarily feel completely disenfranchised by having their agency taken away from them. It's not like, I faint and the monster eats me. It's like, okay, I panic, I scream, and I try to run, get out the window because it's there. Cool, that's a sensible reaction to that.
It's a horrific twist on the whole matter. So how do you want to do this?
Jason, you mentioned at the beginning you had a friend that ran a lot of Dreamlands. And
Yeah.
Call of Cthulhu, one of the areas that it really excels in, because it's such a almost like timeless setting, because like the mythos is eons old.
Yeah.
Is they produce numerous different setting books, both KSEM and third party. Dreamlands is obviously one of the big ones. Did you guys play with any other settings like Gaslight, Pulp?
Cthulhu by Gaslight, Pulp Cthulhu, Delta Green. There was Green and Pleasant Land, which was the UK source book. Yeah, obviously had to do that one.
Always remember the cover of that one. It's like a bunch of guys playing cricket, and there's a tentacle coming around.
And it was a red book. Yeah, I remember that one as well. Yeah, and they were the main ones that I remember off the top of my head. But I think every opportunity to get there was a World War II one as well.
There's a couple
that I haven't played. That's probably about the one I haven't done. I haven't seen anybody do a sci-fi one yet, really.
There's a couple there's in Cthulhu Through the Ages, which is a small chapter book that they produce as part of the 7th Ed Kickstarter. There are small alternate settings, and one of them is a ship off in the far, distant future.
That's a brilliant one.
Yeah, that's good.
Very Event Horizon.
Yes, yeah. There's also a couple of monographs that back in the kind of the dark days of Chaosium, when they didn't produce much of material of their own, and they pretty much had the precursor to what became the Misconduct Repository, which is where fans could create their own source books or material, pretty much do all the art and layout themselves, and then send it to Chaosium for them to print and bind it. Was called the Miskatonic University. I think the Moolah. That's Library Association. That was it. The L and the A came from, and a couple of the Moolahs that came out were like the End Times and Cthulhu in Space. So yeah, there are a few different versions out there, but they are really small. It's very much a niche setting for it. But I've played one that was thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah. I mean, I remember hassling Matt for a while ago because I always quite like the idea of turning Dark Heresy into Cthulhu in Space. So I was hassling him for like, so which scenarios do you reckon would make a 40k conversion and things like that? Because
so you play in the Astartes?
No, definitely not Astartes, definitely not. But you're supposed to be inquisitorial agents, and one of the key thing is to hunt out heresy and cults within the Imperium. So to my mind, Agents of the Warp and stuff like that, it's prime Cthulhu material, at least in kind of concept, if not necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily have a Hound of Tindalos appearing out of the corner of the room, but hey, I might.
I chew it up with my assault cannon. My Terminator armor takes no damage.
Exactly. So I hassled Matt for a long time around how to build a 40k version of a Cthulhu adventure. So.
I remember taking there was two games I loved in the 90s, was Dark Conspiracy and Cult. And Steve, you and we played some Dark Conspiracy at university. But one of the things that I always struggled with was the systems for both kind of sucked. Like Cult has got this amazing cosmology, and the system is just terrible. It's very much a mid-90s point by dreadful system. But the setting is so good. And I eventually was like, why don't I just run it as Call of Cthulhu? The system is so simple and easy to understand. You're doing the same thing. You're making an investigator who's going to investigate the hideous hellscape that is Cult. But why not just use Call of Cthulhu rules? You improvise some sanity rules for the monsters and you're good to go. Same with Dark Conspiracy. It's a great setting, but it's essentially got the Traveller system.
I was going to say, wasn't that GDW, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was GDW. Yep. And, again, while your character can't quite die during character creation, it takes like 12 hours
to... It's more like Twilight 2000 as well.
Exactly the same. Yeah, there's actually a whole section in the rules. It's like, if you want even more detailed rules, you can cross over with Twilight 2000. Yeah. Like, enough. We've got enough
I don't want
rules
to.
here. We don't want more.
I want Serengeti sunglasses. That's what I want.
Exactly. Yeah, I want to play the X-Files, thanks. I don't want to know how to make a Navy SEAL. But that's where I loved the Call of Cthulhu, because you could take that whole setting, the creatures, the system, and just slot it into anything, because it fits and it doesn't take that much work. And I think it's one of the genius ideas of them setting it in the 20s. I think the 20s is close enough that people understand it, but also it's a bit of a fantasy setting. It's a bit different, and you don't have mobile phones, you don't have easy ways of communication, but it's not like you have to go and hit a history book and find out what like 17th century England was like in order to play it. And they included that nice source book from the 1920s in most of their editions, and it's brilliant. It just gives you a very quick rundown on this is what life in the 20s is like, and after that you're good to go, and nobody really bats an eyelid at that.
I think thinking of Cult as an example there, I think one of the campaigns for that could work quite well with the Call of Cthulhu rule sets, the Black Madonna, because that has a lot of the same tropes that a Cthulhu campaign has, that there are different chapters set in different locations. It's a slightly, not as quite as removed as the 20s, but a slightly removed setting from the modern day, because that takes place in the early 90s after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And yeah, I think that could be quite an interesting one to run as a Cthulhu rule set rather than the mythos, because it very much factors into the cult universe rather than the mythos.
Yeah, there was a game that KSM published in the 90s called Nephilim, which was a cult role-playing game. And it was a game I always wanted to run, but like the magic system was just a mess. Well, I say a mess, it was complicated. It's to the extent they had to make a little wheel that they gave out. There was an astrological conjunction wheel that said, oh, it's Tuesday and it's May and these planets will be here, and no, you can't do your spell. But it used the basic role-playing system and therefore was incredibly compatible with Call of Cthulhu. And I always thought that the Nephilim characters were more interesting as antagonists than as things that you would play. They're these like timeless beings that occasionally awake and go and do stuff, and they're behind events in human history. That's a brilliant antagonist for Call of Cthulhu, and a big part of the background and lore of that is how human secret societies try to bind Nephilim and stop them doing their Nephilim-y things. That's a interesting way to flip it and actually play as the investigators investigating something seemingly innocuous, a theft of a vase from a museum. It turns out that's the thing the Nephilim lives in, and therefore somebody's doing something with it. So again, it's another good example of how flexible Call of Cthulhu is when it comes to taking over other games, other settings, and just being this fluid, timeless setting.
I'm still chuckling at the word Nephilim-y.
It's a technical occult term. Jason, what did you think of the Dreamlands then? Because I always liked Lovecraft's Dreamlands story. I think there was probably some serious substances imbibed when they were produced, but no doubt. I always enjoyed them as like an alternative, because while they were very fantastical, there was always horror at the core of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't change, does it, in any Call of Cthulhu? This kind of, whether it's sort of King in Yellow or whether it's Dreamlands, there's always that core of kind of horror in there. So, I mean, we were late teens lads, so I don't think it was particularly horrific, but it was good fun, and it was a definite change of pace. I probably haven't read as much actual fiction of Call of Cthulhu as quite a lot of people on this call, but the little I have, I wasn't really in the Dreamlands, so it was all kind of new and interesting to me. So, I mean, I'd read a fair bit of like Moorcock, and there's I think there's a little bit of kind of similarities between his multiverse and some of his psychedelia compared to, say, the Dreamlands. But yeah, I mean, at the time, I was literally, I would play anything, and I loved everything I played. So it was good. And as I say, massive shift. It was a massive shift away from the standard Call of Cthulhu as well. So that was not only a massive shift away from the RuneQuest I was playing, the D&D I was playing, that kind of stuff. And then the sort of Dreamland stuff was another shift away from that as well. And there were some very weird things happening. Very weird things. Probably things that still haunt my nightmares.
I think why Dreamlands works with Call of Cthulhu is it lets you, as a keeper, throw a complete tonal shift to the players, because it's much more a questing vibe than it is the usual investigative stuff. But there was a scenario in the Dreamlands supplement for 5th Ed, I think it was, that crossed over stuff in the waking world with stuff in the Dreamlands there was one of your friends. He's kind of gone into this weird coma. And it's because he's like been captured by some
Drunk some of that beer,
beast.
hasn't he?
Yeah, and it's you trying to work out the clues in the real world, and then going to sleep and trying to rescue him in the.
I may have played that.
Dreamlands.
That sounds alarmingly familiar.
Yeah, it's a really good because it's definitely got horror at the core because this guy's transforming into something, and you're a race against time to stop him losing all his humanity and becoming this horrible beast from the Dreamlands, and it's very well done. And again, it's got a slight tonal shift when you go in the Dreamlands, but then the horror comes back because, like, yeah, this is Call of Cthulhu. This is not D&D. The things you're going to find here are horrible.
Yeah, there's even that tonal shift which is present in Lovecraft's works. That I think there was the famous quote that Lovecraft wrote that there are my Dunsanian stories, but where are my Lovecraft stories? When he talked about the Dreamlands, because the works of Lord Dunsany were the kind of major influence on his formative tales that became part of the Dreamland cycle, and those have a almost Arabian Nights feel to them when they're fairly self-contained stories, but set in this fantastical environment, a bit like the likes of the Cats of Ulthar would be probably a good example of that. But then you get more towards the questing angle, where it's this long journey through these fantastical landscapes to get towards an ultimate goal. Pretty much solidified in Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, where it ultimately became that conclusion of that Dreamland cycle. And I think a lot of the published scenarios really focus more on the latter, that it's very much when you go into the Dreamlands, you're going there for a particular purpose. Like the chapter, not really much of a spoiler, but there's a chapter in one of the big campaigns, which I won't name, that involves you going into the Dreamlands to find a particular entity there and learn about, you get basically, it's a clue dispenser. You go to this particular thing, it gives you info that can then inform a larger part of the bigger campaign as to what's going on. It's things generally like that in a lot of the more published scenarios that they angle towards that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's certainly my recollection of it. It was always go here to try and find out some more information about what's really going on. Yeah.
There's one scenario, I cannot remember what it's called, but it involves the players ultimately going to a place and they're confronted by aspects of the real world in a dream. I can't remember what the scenario is called, but it's incredibly well done, and I think it'd be a real test of any keeper, because you've got to like confront the players with like the perfect version of themselves or the version of themselves who failed, and they've got to make decisions based on that, and they can end up getting stuck in the Dreamlands because they realise they don't want to go back to reality because they either haven't got the effort to become the perfect version of themselves or they fear becoming the failed version of themselves. And it's incredibly well done. It's a big change from the, you get on a flying ship and head across the mountains and go and fight night gaunts with your sword. It's, again, it's horrific. It's got horror at its core. And I like what you said, Matt, about the earlier Dreamland stories that Lovecraft wrote, because I think you're absolutely spot on with that Arabian Nights feel to them. If you look at a story like The Other Gods, and just the way it's structured, and that it's all based around myth and legend and a moral lesson for the protagonist of what he's going through, and the Cats of Ulthar is also similar. It's also incredibly dark. Mm-hmm. It's a city where there are cats who are intelligent, but there's like two old people who hate cats. And they don't come to a very good end. It's got shades of Poe to it, but it's very good. There's actually a nice little touch. Actually, in the Mythos card game for the Dreamlands expansion, there was a location called the Hovel of the Cat Haters, and it's this abandoned house with like cats crawling all over it, which is quite nice. And that was part one of our Call of Cthulhu Roundtable. Apologies that this sounds like it's been filmed in a tunnel. I'm having microphone problems, but we wanted to get the episode out there. We are I say monthly, not really. We are an occasional podcast on the history of RPGs and associated trades. At time of recording, we have got well over 50 episodes in our back catalogue, featuring all sorts of things from more roundtables like this, to history episodes, to interviews with authors, and of course actual plays. Please, if you haven't already, check them out. If you want to get in touch with us, you can contact us on Twitter at SavePodcast, or you can mail us at roll.2.save.pod@gmail.com. If you're feeling kind, please drop us a review on your podcast app of choice. It really helps us with visibility and getting new folks to see the show. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll be back to join us for part 2 of our roundtable.